did not pop up on there, but I am here now. Hello and welcome, you guys. Super excited about this. I am Jax. I am your host of the Outpost Gray channel. If you're tuning in live, this is definitely outside of our regular hours, which is Thursday from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. And I'm in a different location, as you can see. RSA is all behind me, and we have a live on-site interview, and I am super excited. I already see some people popping in. Bring your questions. We will do our best to do Q&A. This is on my laptop. We're going to be sitting back a little bit, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So first guest up for our very first interview on site out here, we are going to have Rohit Sethi on the show, and he is the CEO of Security Compass. We're going to be talking about security and compliance in the federal space. We're going to talk about how he became the CEO of Security Compass and what he's doing here at RSA. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring the guest on the show, which is just me turning the laptop like this.
Awesome.
Rohit, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Jax.
It is a pleasure to have you. You are the first official live interview that Outpost Gray is doing. We are in collaboration with Grant Thornton Public Sector, so we love when we're able to sit down with somebody that works in the federal space like yourself. Before we kick it off, though, for all of the viewers, and make sure you guys can hear us, let us know if you guys can't hear us. We're both mic'd up. Let's kick it off with you sharing a little bit about your background. Like, what do you do? How'd you become the CEO? Yeah.
Sure. Well, first of all, Security Compass is a company that focuses on software security and compliance. We help people build software secure and compliant by design, which is a special area of the market, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. As for myself, I started off as a consultant in the application security space when there weren't so many people in that space. That was 16 years ago that I joined Security Compass with the founder, Nish Bala. We started off as a consultancy, and then over time decided that there was a need for a product in the secure SDLC, secure by design space. That became our product, SD Elements. I've been focused on that ever since, and we have continued to just grow it. I became the CEO of Security Compass after the former CEO, Nish Bala, decided to semi-retire, take the angel investing kind of life at the end of 2019. And I joined as the CEO in the beginning of 2020, which was an interesting time to start any kind of job, I guess. But it's been a great journey. I really enjoyed it. So that's sort of the background on me.
So before you got tied into Security Compass, what were you doing? What were you doing in the space? Were you in cybersecurity?
I was. So interesting. I graduated from computer science at the .com bust, which is like the only time in history where it wasn't good to be a computer science grad. So I was looking for a job. I didn't know what I was going to do. And that was about the time that Enron and WorldCom scandals had happened. And so there was this new need around, I guess, risk management in general. I ended up joining one of the big consultancies that was looking for people to go into security. So it's not necessarily that I had a passion for security. My passion was software development.
Yeah.
But I thought that the consulting lifestyle was a little glamorous, sounded interesting. And so I ended up joining, and I wanted to retain the software angle. And that's how I found kind of the specific niche of application security. And I stayed there from then on as a consultant, and then afterwards into product.
Yeah, application security is a big area I love. I have a couple of friends that do a lot of work in this space. And okay, so a little bit of a pivot here. We both work in the federal space as well.
Yeah.
And it's an area that I want to make sure that we spend a more time on, is talking about kind of what you do, your company, and what you offer in the federal space. There's a lot of unique challenges working in the private sector versus the public sector. Talk about what Security Compass does in the federal space specifically.
All right, well, I'll start with the wide umbrella, and then I'll talk about how that
Great.
works in the federal sector specifically. So we, as I mentioned before, we help people integrate security into the software development process, specifically at the onset by design. And we have a product called SD Elements, which automates things like threat modeling, secure by design analysis, security requirements, developer security education. And it does so by taking things that were normally done manually. A human expert who maybe comes around with a interview process and goes back and tries to decide, hey, I've looked at this software product, what are the security ramifications, and comes up with a set of recommendations, and all that stuff is kind of informally tracked. There are lots of different names for these kinds of processes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, threat modeling is a pretty common one. Risk analysis from a software standpoint, but there's also compliance activities that are very similar, exact same process flow. And so essentially we automate the question asking, we automate the correlation of those answers to relevant content. What are the specific security issues that particular system needs to, prevent? And then we relate that back to countermeasures or controls, and then essentially becomes the prescriptive list of security requirements that can go into a developer backlog. And then we tie that with testing tools. There's lots of tools that are really good at testing for security and compliance flaws, not so many that tell you how to prevent those issues in the first place. So we tie in and basically say, like, this is the security requirement. Was it tested for, yes or no? So you give this end-to-end picture of assurance, right? And it just so happens that maps really cleanly to certain frameworks, like the NIST risk management framework, which is used quite broadly in the federal space. So we got our sort of initial beginnings with really large financial services companies, very large product software companies, often are the backbone of their entire application security or generally product security program. They'll use our product and be integrated in with a bunch of other systems, and at massive scale, thousands of applications, the most kind of scalable part of their entire program. And so we started this way, and then essentially what happened is we got wind of a certain, we'll say DoD innovation program that was out there kind of exploring commercial tools. And they said, that sounds pretty interesting, because we have this very laborious process called the ATO process, which I'm sure if you're in the federal space, you know very well, which requires a lot of documentation, can take anywhere, up to 12 or 18 months of really just manual work. Yeah. And it was starting to impact, the ability of certain federal orgs to deliver on their mission, right? Because if you have to spend 12 months documenting security evidence to get a release of software out, how are you going to compete with? And can you briefly
explain really briefly, high level, what ATO is?
Sure. So what happens is that federal organizations have to comply with FISMA. And it's essentially a law that requires these orgs to follow certain guidance, NIST 853, which is a big control catalog. And they have to provide evidence that when they are working on a system, when they're building and deploying a system, that they are compliant with all of the relevant controls in NIST 853. Now, this is hundreds of pages
of documentation.
Yeah, and so typically the standard process is to hire an army of people to go in and go control by control and write documentation and provide evidence for each control. And then you go to essentially somebody who has the ability to authorize it, authorizing official, and then they have to review those controls, right? So you can imagine lots and lots of time and money is focused on this set of activities, and it's very frustrating to people who work in the federal space. So somebody who had been seeing this saw what we do, right? Thought that there was an immediate application, because when we define our security controls and requirements, we map to a bunch of standards and laws. So it's one of the specific things that we do is we translate a security control and make it specifically relevant to the software development and DevOps teams. But we also filter, right? So by understanding a bit about the system that somebody is building, we'll say, out of the world of 500 potential controls, maybe there's 120 that are relevant to you. And then here are the specific things that you need to do to make them relevant. And maybe out of the 120, this particular release that you're working on only needs 20 or 30.
Yeah.
Right. So you really kind of hone in, and then, but you have evidence of why you selected the ones that you did, why you didn't select the other ones. And by the way, you're also making the system more secure. You're not just being compliant for the sake of compliance. You're building more secure systems. And what we found is that when we commissioned Forrester to come in and do a total economic impact analysis, they were seeing reductions of something like 80% of time spent on these manual activities, whether it's the ATO process or other manual compliance
Mhm.
processes and bringing it way down. And fundamentally, I think the key things that we're looking to solve are, how do we make more secure products in the
Mhm.
first place,
Yes.
but do so in a commercially feasible way, right? So that,
Yeah.
because there's only so many security pros and compliance pros out there, and if they're spending all this time on documentation, right, they're not spending their time delivering real value. So I think that's why it's been so well received, and the federal business has been growing like crazy over the past couple of years.
So the federal space as a whole is moving into this new paradigm of zero trust. And I'm curious how your product is moving along with those changes that we're seeing from the defense in depth viewpoint to moving into a zero trust, and then the other different compliance frameworks that are going to be associated with that. And then also like CMMC is another part that's coming into the federal space.
Right. So there's, I guess, a couple different angles there. So let's talk about defense in depth. Or sorry, let's talk about zero trust for a minute. So in a zero trust world, every system and every component that you're using has been designed to be resilient, right? The problem is that most people don't design systems to be resilient. The reality is the best practice for most organizations is build software and then test it for security flaws after it's been written, right? But we don't do that with anything else. We don't build a car and then crash test it and try to fix it. We don't build houses and get a home inspector and say, go fix the flaws without thinking about safety from the very beginning. But somehow in software, it's just okay to build software and then look for security flaws. So there's a fundamental problem there. If we're gonna have zero trust, you have systems that are built without thinking about security, it's not going to work. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that. So this whole concept of building secure in by design, I think, is very relevant to a zero trust world. So again, we're seeing demand based off of people, stopping the reliance on perimeter controls, right? And saying everything that we deploy, it can't have security flaws that we've known about for 10, 15, 20 years, and we've known how to prevent them, yet we're still building them into software. Why? Right? And there are good answers as to how to stop them.
Do you think that, and I'm taking notes over here, so do you think that, especially specifically on the software piece, how we're seeing software and security is not the first in the fourth of those engineers that are developing the software, and we're seeing it, emerging technology, disruptive technology, it's coming out more and more quickly. What do you believe we can do as professionals in this space to start putting security as a forefront in those engineer minds? Or is it ever going to happen, or are we just going to have to create these mitigation techniques after the software comes out to mitigate those flaws that are possibly going to be part of that software?
Well, I think the first really important thing is to have empathy for the developers. They need to, first of, they're interested in helping, making something that is productive for their users.
Be first to market too.
Whatever it is, first to market, most compelling user experience, right? And it's not that they are anti-security. It's just that security isn't exciting, and it doesn't push the envelope for the user, right? So when you think about product managers and what they prioritize in their backlogs, they want to do things that will move the market in some way, will move the user experience. So we need to start and recognize that, and with that recognition, right, then we should ask the question, well, like, how do we help the people who want to get these things out? They want to get time to products out quickly, and have a great user experience. And so there's a number of answers to that. I think one, this is where I think we participate, is making the processes as seamless as possible. If they're going to integrate security, it should be as painless as possible. It should require the least amount of effort, right? And I think related to that is the idea that, especially now, we have a great opportunity in front of us. People are migrating to cloud native systems and these sorts of things. And there's a lot of security controls that can be built in right from the start. So if you in the federal space, if you look at the Air Force, they have some programs like Platform One that has really embodied this concept, where they have sort of stacks that have been hardened, that have a bunch of services already built in, so that the amount of work that the individual developer has to do to integrate security is minimal. And I think
that's amazing.
That's the way the world has to go. And we see this from the most mature of our customers, the ones that have basically made it such that developers almost don't have to think about security when they're building, because it's all there on top of the platforms that they're building. So I think that is the biggest win we can have. And you know, you see lots of examples of where that's really successful. If you think about like the iPhone or Android operating system, and how the sandboxes and everything that's embedded inside of it by design, it just makes it a lot harder to do the kinds of things that we saw maybe a decade ago in desktops, right? And so I think that line of thinking about just make it really hard to ever introduce a vulnerability because the platform is secure, I think is absolutely the way to go.
Yeah,
make a big difference.
It's going to start definitely starting at that platform. So let's pivot over to talking a little bit more about the federal space specifically. And I have here, one of the things I really want to touch on is some of the top challenges you've seen working in the federal space. I know that I have myself almost 20 years in the federal space, not all cybersecurity, but working in the IT section or using the systems. And you see that the federal space as a general is very siloed. So that's one area. You know, the Department of State, for example, could have a certain set of procedures and protocols. They could be extremely compliant, but the DoD as a whole is not, and their cloud environment. And there's a lot of things that are still very legacy. For you, what are the top challenges that you've seen in the federal space that you're really working on, you would like to see changed in the next 1 to 2 years?
Any kind of change in the federal space 1 to 2 years is ambitious, but let's just say the changes that are in flight or that we would like to see. I mean, I think some of them are intractable, meaning they're challenges just by the fact that they're a government. So if you think about for a minute, it's not really just the United States federal space. It's really all governments around the world have a certain kind of challenge, right? Which is there's a breach and they have to respond to the breach.
Yeah.
And so every jurisdiction comes up with new requirements.
Yeah.
Right. And so that just makes it much more complex for whoever's building the software to comply with all those requirements. And this is a space again where we really tend to look to add value to our customers, which is I don't want you to be expert in like 25 different regulations and standards. You should just know what is that security control you need to build, and then have something else map to the various requirements to tell you, okay, now that you've done this, that's a requirement in NIST 153. It's a requirement in it's an ISO standard. It's a requirement in like a European law and an Australian law. Yeah, without thinking about the
the frameworks,
all of the sections of all these standards and guidelines. They should just know what is the work they need to do and not think about the sort of legal aspects of it. So I think there's certainly work that we in the security community through tooling and other support can make it much easier to maintain compliance. But I think that's an intractable problem of government. It's just the way it is. I think the other problem, of course, in government that we see, I think is really acute is the talent challenge. It's hard enough in the commercial space to attract people who have the right skill set.
Yeah. And then in the government, you have a salary, GS, and you're going to get, tap out at 150 is GS 15 or something.
That's right.
And it's an engineer, for example, and you can go get $250,000 on the commercial side, for example. It's tough. I mean,
it is tough. And, I don't pretend to have some quick solution. I think the thing that I have seen rarely, but sometimes, and I'm sure you've seen something similar to this, is that some government orgs are good at motivating people through mission. And so in the commercial space, it's a little bit harder often if you're working for an insurance company, right? And what they want to do is they want to make money. And it's not maybe as intrinsically motivating. I'm sure you could, write a story about how insurance helps to protect things, but it's not as intrinsically motivating perhaps as helping your country, right?
Yeah.
So they do have that that draw, right? But if
only
the
goes so
compensation doesn't line up, it's hard.
It only
It's
goes so
hard.
far. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jen Easterly, director of CISA, she took a large pay cut to come over, but happy to have her. I mean, it's public service.
Yeah,
Working in the government,
right.
it's public service in a way. Okay, so I know we're starting to come to time for our session, but before we wrap, I want to ask you so what's your goals here at RSA? Everybody has, I mean, you haven't even had a chance to go into any of the sessions. I'm fortunate enough to be able to have this interview because you're back to back to back. So what are your goals and initiatives of being at RSA and just overall for Security Compass?
Okay, well, RSA,
two-part question.
It's a lot easier. It's for me. It's just the opportunity to meet people again. I mean, I know things have become a little calmer recently, but it seems like the past couple of years, it's just been a lot of Zoom meetings, and just to come back and
personal,
in person,
right?
Like probably 3 months ago, this would have been a Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
So meeting people in person is so good, and so that's basically what I've lined up my time here is just meeting people that we would have just done calls, right? So that's my entire focus personally for RSA. We have a bunch of people here, all with different reasons to be here.
Yeah.
We do have a booth on the exhibition floor, so if you're watching and you're at RSA, please stop by. As for Security Compass, I think that we are seeing a very big change happening in the world where people are recognizing what I talked about. So just take one step back for a minute. There's lots of breaches, lots of reasons for breaches, but in many cases, you can link it to a CVE. There was some vulnerability in some software that was written, and I kind of alluded to this, but very often that software vulnerability was a thing that we knew how to fix a decade ago or 5 years ago. People aren't doing it. And so for us, our mission really is related to helping people do that, but do so in a way that lets them ship software quickly. And if we can achieve that, I think we will make a material impact on the world, and that's what keeps us all motivated.
I love that.
I think for the next few years, for us, there's a really big opportunity. People are starting to understand that. They're starting to understand security by design instead of just through testing. And so, we are out there. We've become, I should mention, we had our consulting company up until last year. We divested it to Kroll, and now we are just a software company. So we're looking to grow. We're looking to partner with other services companies to help to implement the products, kind of around the world. And it's an exciting time for us, for sure.
So what is the best way for somebody to be able to contact you? Is that going to be LinkedIn, email, whatever contact you want to share?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn, feel free to
I will drop that in the episode notes for everybody. You'll have that down below.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Final notes, final things that you'd like to say before departing.
I think I'll just reiterate that, software by design is absolutely critical, and compliance by design, both in the commercial space and the federal space. And so, I am looking for all the support I can just to spread that message. So if you're listening to this and this resonates with you, please continue to do everything you can to spread that message so that we don't just rely on testing systems and hope that that's enough, that we are holistically building secure systems from the start.
I love it. All right. Well, you heard it here. Rohit, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You guys, we're going to be going live tomorrow. If you want to know who we're going to be interviewing, just go to my LinkedIn, Jax S. You can find it there. I'll repost it because I honestly cannot remember. We have like 3 interviews or something like that tomorrow. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for showing up. Make sure to like and share this out. You guys are the best. Bye.